Epstein was absolutely doing a lot of really shady arms trafficking stuff and financial criminality, and they have no interest in getting deep in the weeds there.
Because if we know everything, it opens up everything. It's Pandora's box.
Well, it is a Pandora's box in a way, yeah, sure. Because basically, if you go, as my books show, if you go as deep as I went in writing those 2 books, and you could certainly go deeper, it basically shows that, the world is basically run by a meta cartel. It's important to point out, when I say Epstein had a relationship with people, I'm not saying they had a sex blackmail relationship necessarily. Yeah. What we're trying to untangle here is the truth of who Epstein was and why was he taken down, because I don't think he was taken down because in 2019 all of a sudden the US government became outraged about the sweetheart deal of 2007, 12 years after the fact, and then wanted to rectify some wrong. I think it was about something else.
What is, for you, there might be multiple answers to this, but the biggest unanswered question that you have?
Is it okay to swear?
You can say whatever the fuck you want.
Okay.
Although we're not.
Well, I'm not planning to swear too much. I just was curious.
We're not meant to swear in the first 15 minutes. YouTube doesn't like it. I think we'll be right. Anyway, good to see you, Whitney.
Yeah, great to see you again too, Peter.
Beautiful part of the world. Okay, we're going to talk Epstein. The trail seems to have gone cold. We were promised all the files were going to be released.
Yeah.
The Black Book, and then suddenly there's nothing. There's nothing to see.
Well, there is the Black Book. That was released in 2015. But beyond that, yeah. So a lot of people were expecting all sorts of new information about the case, and there was this big, attempt at making it look like that happened with, a bunch of influencers came to the White House and had all these binders, and they were like, Epstein Files Part 1, but then it turned out a lot of those documents, pretty much all of them, had already been previously released, and I don't know, it seems like the administration was
Now, I don't know if you guys remember that with you had Jack Posobiec and, Libs of TikTok, all those fools coming out with those binders. And, it turns out that they were just grifting on behalf of the US government. And you would think at that point, when it was revealed that the information in those binders was already made public, that people would kind of start realizing that, well, maybe I shouldn't really associate with these so-called conservative influencers, because they seem to be either in on the cover-up or they're being paid enough money and given enough influence to look the other way or to just play the game. So it's just something I think a lot of people, unfortunately, kind of just overlooked or made excuses for their, getting the rug pulled over on them. It's really interesting, and seeing them kind of move the goalpost and make excuses for those people, essentially kind of fooling their audience and their fan base into believing that truth would be revealed.
Was expecting that would be enough to kind of satisfy people, because they did, the bells and whistles and made it look like that's what they were doing, but then didn't expect, I guess, people to be like, so what gives? And then with continued pushing, eventually, instead of getting more, we got this dramatic reversal to the point where now Trump, after, a lot of the stuff about Epstein was kind of talked about a lot during his presidential campaign. Now it's he says it's all a Democrat hoax.
Very strange.
Strange is one word for it, yeah.
Did you watch Kash Patel's interview with Rogan?
I saw clips from it, but I didn't feel like watching Kash Patel for 3 hours.
Well, so I thought Rogan did a great job. He was pushing Kash, but that was the point I started to think, this is getting a bit weird. And I started to question, well, there was an opportunity for the Biden administration to use this against the Trump administration, and there's been a chance for the Trump administration to use it against the Biden administration. And both administrations love dirt,
Yeah.
Both want to attack the other one.
Sure.
And now both are just kind of like...
Well, kind of. So with this recent reversal that we just talked about, a lot of Democrat congressmen are, kind of smell blood in the water, and we're calling to release the files and all of this. But I think neither party wants things to go too deep. So a lot of the benefit to partisan politics of the Epstein scandal, it only really is beneficial to either side if it's kept very superficial, you know? And so I think, releasing a tranche of documents about everything would end up implicating, it would go too deep, probably. That's my assumption of why they kind of want to memory hole it now and sort of rebrand it as a hoax, which is kind of challenging because a lot of Trump's base has been very interested in the Epstein case, arguably more than the Democrats' voter base for years.
Well, it feels like it's dented the MAGA movement maybe temporarily.
Maybe. We'll see.
So, is it your belief that there is a treasure trove of information that we would all be interested in?
Well, there's definitely information that they should put out there, I think. So, for example, the FBI raided Epstein's New York townhouse. They were reportedly binders, CDs full of multimedia content, all sorts of stuff. We don't really know what was on those. We had Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, say, "Oh, it's on my desk," and then is saying, "Oh, well, we can't release it because it's all CP. It's child porn." After saying like, "Oh no, it's implying it was releasable." But there's also a lot of strange things that would be interesting to know. Like, why did the FBI, even though they raided Epstein's residence in New York, why did they not raid Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, another property within the continental U.S.? Why did it take them up to a month to get to his island in the U.S. Virgin Islands? As far as I'm aware, those delays are unexplained. What about the France case? Jean-Luc Brunel, one of the main, or alleged co-conspirators of the Epstein case, died in a French prison awaiting trial, much like Epstein in 2022. and we don't really have a lot of information from French authorities about what they found as part of that investigation, because obviously with Brunel not going to trial because he died, it's not going to come out in the court, right?
Also died by hanging, and no surveillance footage as well.
Well, I'm not sure about the circumstances of the death, but it was pretty much. I mean, it's kind of shady, yeah. I mean, there was another death related to Epstein in 2022. Mark Middleton.
Yes.
That was completely bonkers.
Hanging and shot.
Yeah, hanging by police say that he hung himself with an extension cord and also shot himself in the chest. Said there was no weapon at the scene. Later came back and said there was a weapon 30 feet from his body. And then the judge sealed all evidence from ever being made public to stop the spread of harmful conspiracy theories. So Brunel dying in prison, I'm not really aware of the circumstances, but you know.
Do you want to explain the connection of Brunel and Middleton to Epstein?
Well, they're separate connections. Yes. So Brunel is a lot more connected to Epstein in the sense of the sex trafficking case. So he and Epstein worked together on this modeling agency called MC2, where under the guise of modeling contracts, Brunel would coax a lot of women from places like Brazil, from Eastern Europe, and Russia, among other places, to come model in the U.S. Epstein would pay for their visas, among other expenses, for this agency, and they would come to the U.S. and be housed at these apartment complexes.
You know who did the exact same thing? Abercrombie and Finch. They did this exact same thing, but with the male models. The exact same thing.
Complexes that are there's multiple attestations to that being a key part of the sex trafficking operation. Allegedly, women's passports were taken, so they were, very controllable under those circumstances. Yeah, so I mean, Brunel was a key part in that sense, and he also operated stuff out of Miami and Palm Beach. He had modeling agencies there, and he was known as far back as the 1980s to be an alleged sex trafficker and sexual predator. There was a 60 Minutes expose about him, and then an author, I think his name is Michael Gross, wrote a whole piece about a whole book about the dark side of the modeling industry, and a key focus of his work was Jean-Luc Brunel. So he's, pretty well known as being an accomplice of Epstein in court documents and beyond.
And Middleton was
Middleton was the main person that Epstein was meeting with when he was going to the Clinton White House in the 1990s.
And he went a lot.
Well, he went 17 times between 93 and January 95, and Middleton left in February 95. So basically, there's a more or less a coinciding between the end of Epstein going to the Clinton White House and Middleton's ouster from there. Yeah, and in Middleton's suicide happened shortly after the extent of those meetings was revealed. So it was known that Epstein had been to the White House a few times, but they didn't, the full extent, the 17 meetings, most of them were with Middleton. That information came out in 2022, and a few months later, this incident with Middleton takes place.
There appears to be a lot of people connected to the Clintons who've died. I think you said in an interview I heard there was like another 34 that haven't been listed.
Oh yeah, well that has to do with the Commerce Department. So this is part of this broader scandal, and it's very complicated, but I try and delineate it in my book. But basically there was this whole airliner, or this whole airplane that was carrying people from the Commerce Department, including the Secretary of Commerce, Ron Brown, and their plane, crashed in Croatia under kind of dubious circumstances. And I would argue that those were kind of I don't really think that plane crash was an accident. And I explain why in my book, but there's lots of... Ron Brown had just agreed to testify as part of this broader case involving corruption involving the Clinton families and the scandal that Middleton, and I argue in my book, Epstein was a part of, called...
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here.
circumstances. And yeah, I would argue that those were kind of, I don't really think that plane crash was an accident. And I explain why in my book. But there's lots of, Ron Brown had just agreed to testify as part of this broader case involving corruption involving the Clinton families and the scandal that Middleton, and I argue in my book, Epstein was a part of, called Chinagate. It's remembered as Chinagate, but it was definitely something much bigger than that, and we can get into that later. It's very insane.
See, what I can't figure out is, so listening to your book, reading your most recent article, there seems to be a large network of elites, which can be anything from business, successful business people, billionaires, finance people, politicians, presidents, NGOs,
Sure.
secret services. There's like this huge network of people, and I can't work out, is there a big coordinated network of elites who work together, or is it just once you get into the elites, maybe you think you can get away with a few things, you can maybe do some corrupt deals, and if you've got the right connections, you can get away with it. If you step too far out of line, that you might go to jail or be killed. I can't quite get my head around it, but that it does come across that all governments are basically mafias.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my view.
Yeah.
So basically what I argue in my book.
Now, I know that this is where I think certain people's criticisms of her would be valid. And I think also part of it is that because of the type of work that she does. So, like he's talking about like these people and their clear obsession with power and influence and control. But they never talk about the occult aspect of it. The ritual aspect of all of this type of power and dark power and control. And I know one person who's been very critical of her. Shout out to Goldstein, because her, I've seen enough interviews of her. She will never talk about like the occult aspect of a lot of these elites and what they're involved in terms of their religious beliefs. And I think for me personally, from what I've listened to her, I think a lot of the reason why she doesn't do any of that is because it muddies the waters of her information, and it doesn't make it as credible as she would like it to be. My personal opinion. I could be wrong, but I think a lot of it has to do with her wanting to maintain her credibility in the information that she provides to the masses. So that's just me personally on it. That's why I don't think she will talk about, those secret societies and any of the history of them throughout all of the information that she's been providing and researching. I just think that for her, it doesn't do any service in what she's trying to do in necessarily exposing and educating people on the inner workings of these powerful government entities and oligarchies.
Is that the network behind Epstein, and the reason why there's so many powerful people in this group is because it's born out of this union that occurred during World War II between organized crime and the nascent U.S. intelligence apparatus, which of course there was a lot of British involvement with that when in the creation of the CIA and the OSS and all of that in World War II. But that alliance officially happened. It's known as Operation Underworld, even though the U.S. intelligence community denied it for several decades. They now admit it. But that alliance, it was justified out of wartime necessity. We have to team up with the mob to win the war, right? But after the war, the alliance provably continued. So, ultimately, what happened.
Well, yeah, she's right. I mean, the alliance evolved from working with the mob to working and funding the cartels.
happened then is that a lot of these rackets that were previously organized crime, arms trafficking, drugs trafficking, sex trafficking, prostitution, whatever, became, rackets of intelligence services.
In what way?
Well, I mean, there's a litany of evidence of the CIA being involved in drug trafficking and arms trafficking via illegal means for many decades. And a lot of those networks that the CIA used go back to the same nexus. I mean, that's basically what volume 1 of my book is about.
But why would they be in bed with these criminals?
It's great business. The CIA in the OSS were really mostly Wall Street people, Wall Street lawyers and bankers, and it was great business for them to team up with these people. So basically, it's a new market.
They were also actors. Back in the day, one of my favorite actors, Sterling Hayes, he used to work for the OSS. And he used to do gun running for the OSS. All right, this is a famous actor who worked for the intel agencies doing gun running and then went back to becoming an actor. So they're also involved in the entertainment world as well.
It's a illegal market with state protection. And so the CIA more often than not has gone over the competition for those markets. And that's why you have all these scandals, but no accountability for the CIA being involved in drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and all sorts of scandals over the years. But there's never been any accountability since, there was an effort with it at the, during the Church Committee in the late 70s. But since then, the CIA investigates itself and exonerates itself every time.
Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to get my head around this. So whilst the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, is meant to be protecting U.S. interests abroad,
they define U.S. interests, I think, as something than what the American public is. So if you look at the CIA's earliest coups, their earliest regime change operations, they were done on behalf of very powerful multinational corporations, like Anglo-American Oil in Iran, and the United Fruit Company in Guatemala, some of the earliest examples. So to them, protecting U.S. interests is protecting the interests not necessarily of the American people, but of massive American-based, multinational corporations.
So it's all economic defense?
In a sense.
Arguably economic defense. Because wasn't the Guatemala, didn't they remove a kind of socialist leader who wanted to return land to the Guatemalans?
Yeah. Well, that historically has been the justification for a lot of it. And a lot of the justification was sort of Cold War era stuff. We don't want this leader to become close to the Soviets. Ergo, we must remove him from power. But, the means of that have been pretty scandalous, especially if you look at, what came downstream of some of those governments. In Latin America, for example, Chile being a notable example where, Henry Kissinger and the CIA in 1973 orchestrated a coup against Salvador Allende, and then Augusto Pinochet takes over. Mm-hmm. And, it's obviously a still very sore spot in Chilean politics. But objectively, there's a lot of things Pinochet did that are really indefensible. He teamed up with a German pedophile guy who ran this place called Colonia Dignidad with his government's approval. A lot of people tied to the Pinochet government were involved in basically trafficking babies that were stolen from their mothers and then sent to adoption agencies at the U.S. People made money off of this.
That sounds very familiar to what was going on with the Biden administration. I forgot how many was it? 500,000 children were missing. And when they were able to sometimes find the trail for some of these kids, they were essentially getting passed on through NGOs that were getting funded through church organizations, private adoption agencies. You have these kids literally getting taken from their parents and then given to then adopted to all sorts of nefarious characters, some of which were reported to local social agencies about them sexually abusing these adoptive kids, but nothing was done about it. All this was going on under the Biden administration. You can look it up. I mean, I would not be surprised if it's still going on under the Trump administration. So I'm not going to pretend as if it's not a possibility. I would not be surprised. But, that's just something that, I wanted to just make clear that, yeah, this was happening back in the day, but it was happening, 2 years ago.
And nothing was done. And he had a lot of really shady bank accounts, did shady arms deals. So, okay, the socialist guy is gone, but, was it really any, did it really justify all this other stuff? I mean, I'm probably going to get in trouble for getting into Chilean stuff just because, like, people will accuse me of defending one side or the other, but I think, obviously Pinochet engaged in behavior that was really, really bad and should,
And it's interfering with the democratic process.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, people elect a leader, and then the CIA comes in and deposes them and puts in a dictator. I mean, they've done this around the world.
Over and over.
Over and over again. And, I mean, it's not even, they've also interfered in elections throughout Europe. They engaged in things like Operation Gladio, where that was basically teaming up with, the Italian mafia, interests of the Vatican, and the CIA-backed terror groups in Europe, those terrorist activities were blamed on left-leaning people in order to get people to vote with right-leaning parties to prevent European countries from affiliating themselves with, the Soviet Union. But would they have even have done that? I don't know. I mean, it was a preemptive thing. And so, I mean, eventually, but I mean, again, this is how the CIA justifies the stuff to itself. I would argue that a lot of it was about economic interests. And at the same time, a lot of these actors were involved in sort of backrooms deals with, either Soviet intelligence, or Chinese intelligence or the Chinese military. That's sort of what the Chinagate thing ultimately circles back to. And
Tell me about that.
Well, really quick, I want to bring up this point. So Samuel Pisar, a very close friend of Robert Maxwell, who I'm sure we'll get into later, he was a lawyer, among other things. He testified to Congress in the early 70s about what he saw happening, and he talked about the rise of the trans-ideological corporation, where U.S. multinational corporations were basically entering into all these joint ventures and becoming extremely entangled with state-owned companies of the communist East in Russia and China. And he said that this was creating a new economic system of governance that was making the nation state irrelevant. And this is in the early 70s. And a congressman was like, well, do you think this is a bad thing? And he was like, not necessarily. And he was actually at the forefront of making that happen. And a lot of these people, including people like Robert Maxwell, did try and further that kind of vision.
For those who are not aware, Robert Maxwell is Ghislaine Maxwell's father.
So ultimately, if that was happening in the early 70s and they admitted it, a lot of these actors that justified things out of the necessity of the Cold War, just like they justified it with out of the necessity of World War II, it really doesn't add up with what the public justification is.
Is it even possible to understand what the mandate of the CIA is then? Because it seems very...
Well, it's supposed to be to protect American national security. But national security for a long time has been this huge catch-all, right?
Of course, yeah, that's
and
what
the
I mean.
U.S. has justified all sorts of things under the guise of national security, and presumably continued to do so. So, I don't really give that a lot of weight. I mean, so as an example, like the Reagan administration, when Iran-Contra was being investigated, there was a line of questioning brought up about how the group that was responsible for that in the Reagan administration had developed something called the continuity of government protocols, whereby under a vaguely defined national emergency, basically the entire American Constitution could be suspended. pretty scandalous stuff. And one of the examples of this vaguely defined national emergency was a widespread nonviolent opposition to U.S. military intervention abroad. And when a congressman tried to ask Oliver North about this at the Iran-Contra trial, they basically shut down the hearing.
What's really interesting about that protocol is that there was a really famous. It happened maybe last year. I think, I'm not sure if the guy, he was either worked at intelligence or he worked at the Pentagon. I don't remember, but he was high up official, and he essentially said that if we lose the youth to like these TikTok videos exposing American imperialism throughout the world, we lose the ability to fund our wars, because the youth are not going to want to sign up. They're not going to be easily manipulated and propagandized. And I think you're kind of seeing that as of late now, where Gen Z, they don't even want to go to work, let alone go invade another country.
Under the guise of national security.
But
it's crazy.
Well, if you think the economic strength of the US is national security, that's a catch-all for protecting
the American multinational corporations that openly admitted, if you believe peace, are intermingling with the state-owned companies of China and Russia are ostensible adversaries.
But you can justify the protection of a multinational in another country by changing the administration. And you could...
Or re-domiciling them, sure, yeah.
Or allowing or turning a blind eye to banks banking money from drug trafficking.
Yeah, of course.
And so it then creates a different set of rules for those within the elite gang of what they can and can't do from what you and I as mere plebs.
So taking this back to the Epstein scandal, I think that's why they only want to keep the discussion at sex trafficking.
Because it's wider than sex.
Because it's wider than that. Epstein was absolutely doing a lot of really shady arms trafficking stuff and financial criminality, and they have no interest in getting deep in the weeds there.
Because that exposes other people.
Sure. Absolutely. And basically, this illusion that our world operates the way, we're told it operates.
Yeah, but I think we know it doesn't anymore. The veil has been lifted. I think... The only worry is this, we...
Shout out to Sarah. You listened to this video twice? Yeah, it's, you know what? For everyone, please make sure to hit that like button. Thank you all for tuning in. Hit that like button, you handsome, lovely devils. Yeah, Sarah, this is a very interesting discussion. Shout out to John. Thank you very much. I'm doing pretty good, man. I'm really enjoying this conversation, Sarah. I totally get why you listened to it twice, because you listen to it one more time and everything that you heard the first time, it resonates even more the second time around because it's a lot more fresher in your head. But, I really enjoy this conversation because I think for a lot of us out there, it just adds a little bit of clarity to our own questions and speculations that we've had about things. And it just makes it easier for anyone who's been getting into this type of realm of the reality of our situation. It really makes for a great discussion for your own ability to kind of question your own reality and presence in this system that we're in. And I really enjoy it. And I think for me, I've learned a lot of really interesting things, and even had a lot of my own thoughts confirmed by a lot of my own suspicions from listening and researching and hearing other people talk about this stuff. It's truly fascinating. Say what you will about, Whitney Webb. We can have our opinions about her, but at least she's consistent. That's one good thing.
We move on so quickly, we just forget about this Epstein thing, and it's just this thing in the past. Yeah, it was that
Well,
guy
it's been
sex
pretty persistent in not being forgotten about, which I think now, in the case of the Trump administration, they really wish people would.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sarah. He seems really easy to talk to, and the whole conversation really moves with great fluidity and chemistry. I like him. I like the way he conducts himself in the interviews. Shout out to Haram Life. Much love to you. See you soon, buddy. Yeah, I haven't got a chance to read her books, but anytime I get a chance to see any of her interviews, I listen in because you really learn. She really educates you, and I really appreciate that. And she's easy to listen to. She says it all in a manner that's easy to understand. You can take notes. You can do your own research. And like I said before, the consistency with her is what makes her a really good journalist.
Move along and forget about it.
But it does feel like ever since Trump came out, the last few weeks, it feels like it has been going cold. People have been talking about it a bit less.
Yeah, maybe. Well, so much is going on in the U.S. with U.S. policy that it's, stuff that's huge news, it end up buried a few days later. And, a decade ago, it would have been a huge multi-month long story. Now it's just a blip. The news cycle is just so fast, too. So, there's a lot of reasons why that could be. But, I think also just because, it was the Epstein case was particularly popular with Trump's base, less so with the Democratic base. Now a lot of the influencers in that media circuit are either being like, yes, it was a hoax, or are, have moved on to other things.
Because the trail's gone dead? Like, what else we can keep asking questions.
Well, I don't know what you mean by trail going dead. I think it's pretty clear that the administration does not plan to release further documents, and they've said that. And I guess there's this planned congressional hearing where they've subpoenaed the Clintons and some other things, some other people, but I anticipate that'll be a pretty controlled hearing. I don't think you're going to hear any questions about Mark Middleton or Chinagate there, or what Epstein was doing those 17 times he went to the White House. It's all going to be about everything that happened after Clinton was no longer president, which is, if you look at how the Epstein case has been treated with respect to Bill Clinton for years now, it only focuses on Clinton after he left office. It's the same for Bill Gates too. They only focus on the Gates-Epstein relationship after Gates was no longer chairman of Microsoft.
So it's plan controlled, a trickle of information, feeding scraps to us?
Yeah, it's like it's defining the spectrum of what's interesting. It's a limited hangout, so it's like they find some tidbits that are interesting within a spectrum, and people are so entranced by what's in that spectrum, they don't look for anything beyond that. They just assume that's all there is.
Because if we know everything, it opens up everything. It's Pandora's box.
Well, it is a Pandora's box in a way. Yeah, sure. Because basically, if you go, as my books show, if you go as deep as I went in writing those two books, and you could certainly go deeper, it basically shows that, the world is basically run by a meta cartel.
Explain that.
It's run by a meta cartel that worships dark entities and practices ritualistic cult magic to fuel and sustain the power that they have through blood, tears, and war. I've one thing I don't know anyone out there who's into anime, but there's the 2010 version of a show called Full Metal Alchemist. And a little bit of a spoiler here, but I'm not going to spoil how they get to it. But essentially, powerful individuals create war and conflict in certain different areas.
Well,
and these certain different areas are over these type of ley lines, and this war and conflict in those areas channels the center of where these ley lines converge. And these powerful people were using that war and violence and death to channel this energy into this one area to amplify their strength and power and control over the region. That's what the show is about. I always look at what we see right now with these powerful elites and oligarchs and secret societies. I think it's something very similar to that, where because of what they worship and practice, it needs to be constantly fed. It's like having a parasite inside of you. If you're a gamer, there's a game called Destiny 2. They have these worm gods. And if you agree to the powers that the worm god will bestow upon you, you must spend the rest of your life feeding that worm inside you through whatever powers it gives you. Some people, it's through war. So you have to constantly kill and fight in order to feed that worm to maintain your power. And I feel that is something that we are experiencing right now with all of these various powerful elites and what have you. The difference here is that Whitney Webb is not going to talk about that aspect of it.
I would argue, yeah, it is a cartel. It basically operates with impunity, and they have no accountability for all of their crimes, even when they're exposed here and there. Some people just are protected and above the law, almost inexplicably. And as I point out in my book, it's a lot of the same actors over and over again, the same institutions, and you can see when one institution crumbles, another one pops up in its place. So as an example in the book, I talk a lot about the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, that implodes in 1991. It's covered up by William Barr when he was Attorney General, who covered up Iran-Contra, the Promise software scandal, and BCCI, all as being Attorney General, and later would return to kind of do that for Trump 1 when he was Attorney General again. But after BCCI implodes, a lot of their portfolio of organized crime and shady interests goes to the banks of that are sort of related to this guy named Edmund Safra. And Edmund Safra dies in his home, supposedly from the story is very bizarre, but from arson allegedly set by his American nurse because she wanted to set a fire and then save him from it, but then didn't save him from it. Yeah. It's fine. Anyway, he was very good friends with Robert Maxwell and a lot of these figures that pop up all over the place in the Epstein case. And then who absorbs his banks? HSBC. They basically take those over, and then HSBC gets exposed. I forget. I think that it wasn't the Panama Papers, but it was like one of those consortium of journalists that published these leaks, basically revealed a lot of prominent people that were part of these HSBC Swiss accounts that had been inherited from Safra. Epstein was one of them. Some associates of Epstein, like Flavio Briatore, are there, but also, HSBC was laundering money for drug cartels. And who didn't go after them when they were in charge of the Bank of England? Mark Carney, who is now Prime Minister of Canada.
And everyone's leaving.
And while he was head of the Bank of England, there's pictures of him hanging out with Ghislaine. Who's, Father Robert Maxwell was banked by Safra, among other things. So.
Well, I remember him from my childhood because he was a prominent figure in the UK, owning
of course.
a mirror group, and waking up one day and his body's found in the ocean. Mm-hmm. Another suspicious death.
Yeah, Ghislaine thinks it was rogue Mossad agents and Sicilian mafia hitmen that killed him.
Together?
Working together. It's kind of funny because that's kind of the thesis of my book. It's like the National Crime Syndicate, which was the Italian mafia, their New York branch, and later their head got deported to Italy and sort of set up shop there. And then the Jewish mob that was headed by Mayor Lansky. And that basically this crime syndicate is the crime syndicate that teamed up with, the intelligence agencies. Because this Operation Underworld, all of that, the formation of this nexus predates the founding of the State of Israel. And so a lot of these actors, and I note this in my book too, were involved with the arming of the Haganah and these paramilitary groups that later create Israel in 1948, and then help them set up their intelligence agencies. So that's sort of how you get all this overlap between, you know, Mossad, Britain, CIA. It goes back to, you know, the beginning of Israel's national security complex, really.
I have this picture in my head of like a huge wall of pinballs with bits of string tying things together, but I think it all exists in your head.
It doesn't all exist in my. I mean, I have to put it on paper and plan it out too. I don't do the stereotypical, the conspiratorial pinboard thing. That's like the Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme. Like, I don't do that. But I mean, some of it does require mapping out because I mean, think about how these people operate. These people could not have gotten away with all of this as it wasn't for mazes of holding companies, shell companies, Byzantine offshore banks, and I mean all the other things that enable financial criminality in today's world. So obviously the connections are
Well, it makes sense. You create the system, you then develop the loopholes, and then you exploit the loopholes for your illegal gains.
similarly going to be labyrinthian and Byzantine. But they are there.
Okay, but how do you make sense of it all? Because it is a large, complex network of people, institutions, politicians, billionaires. How does so many people get away with it?
I basically feel like I pretty convincingly show in my book that there's a lot of baton passing going on between the generations. So like my book starts in the 40s and I follow a lot of these institutions and people through the years. So, you know, I talk a lot about how a figure named Roy Cohn, who was Donald Trump's mentor, and how he passed a lot of things on to Trump. How a lot of people that were in Cohn's network got involved with Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell hired them when he came to the U.S., including figures like Robert Keith Gray that were PR executives on their face, but also tied to the CIA, involved in sex blackmail, close friends with William Casey, who was CIA director under Reagan, among other things. And how they, you know, got involved with Maxwell's entry into New York City, which is how, you know, mainly how Ghislaine got so enmeshed in New York society, and also, you know, teamed up with Epstein in that same period of time. So, you know, all of this matters, and these connections are significant because this baton passing shows that this is a generational thing. And in the case of Maxwell, you know, Robert Maxwell's children, at least the ones that were close to him, because you have two that sort of splintered off from the larger Maxwell clan, but are very open that, you know, after he died, they were trying to figure out how to rebuild his empire and using his Rolodex of contacts to rebuild that. And they did it in doing so, you know, you have Ian and Kevin doing all this interesting financial stuff after, you know, their father's death. And then the twins, Isabel and Christine, make this search engine company and get involved with Microsoft and Bill Gates and all this stuff back in the 90s. And Ghislaine Maxwell was reportedly involved in that too. And then also very involved with Epstein and all sorts of other things, and eventually becomes one of the main people at the UN developing sustainable development policy for the world's oceans.
It's interesting. What you say? Sarah said. What Sarah says? She doesn't map things out, but I have to take notes or I can't keep up. Yeah, it's not really a map. I don't, you know, it's more of like one large sequence of events, and you know, I haven't had a chance to peel open her books. I would imagine that her books make it a lot more easier to just see the map. I know she doesn't think it's like a map, but you know, it eventually it is going to become a map because, you know, the more books that she writes, the more expansive all of these networks seem to be. But, you know, one thing I think is interesting is that in the end, it's all really about money. Just the sex trafficking is just a form of exploitation to gain access to more money and resources.
People know they can start acting with How
So
impunity.
the best analogy I've heard for that is actually from the journalist Nick Bryant, who's the guy
Okay.
that published Epstein's Black Book with Gawker and the flight logs, among other things. And he also wrote an amazing book on the Franklin scandal, which is about this extremely insane sexual blackmail and sex trafficking pedophilia network, really, that was active in DC in the 1980s during the Reagan era. And he basically had someone explain it to him. I forget who his source was, but it was basically, imagine it like you're on a yacht and, you're invited on this yacht, and then you can do whatever you want while you're on the yacht, but you try and get off and you'll drown, or they won't let you get off. You'll be popped off if you try and leave. So as long as you're like in the club, operating within the club's rules, you can act with impunity, but there's certain things you can't do in order to enjoy that impunity.
So is it like a set of unsaid rules? You with us?
I would not know.
Yeah, but what's your suspicion? Because like I'm trying to understand how once you're in this thing, you start to feel like, okay, I can start trafficking weapons. I can start trafficking women, young kids. I can start doing financial deals. Like, how do you know you're in that club and you can get away with it? It's so weird.
I'm not really sure, but let's take the case of Epstein, for example.
Yeah.
So it seems like Epstein's mentors in this world were a British arms dealer named Douglas Leese and a friend of Leese's named Adnan Khashoggi, who is a very infamous weapons dealer with ties to the Saudis, the UK, American intelligence, Israeli intelligence. No, that's Jamal Khashoggi.
Oh,
that's
okay.
his nephew, I
What?
believe. Yeah.
And we all know what happened to that man's nephew. They chopped that man up into little pieces and threw him into acid buckets. It's a very small world.
And Adnan Khashoggi, as an example, he was known for a lot of financial crime. He had a interesting appearance in the savings and loans crisis of the 1980s, for example. He banked with BCCI. He was a major arms dealer. And also he would basically he had a yacht. He would bring powerful clients, which of course include politicians. They include diplomats.
Okay, one thing that just crossed my mind. How do you become a mentor to an arms dealer? How does that happen? Like, how do you get an internship with an arms dealer? How does that work in this world? All right. I have not seen that on any of the employment websites or in the classifieds, so I'm a little confused.
They include businessmen, powerful people in general, onto his yacht, and there would be young women there to entice them. And people have alleged.
Sarah says, it's funny to me that there are so many conspiracies about why she hasn't been on Rogan. I think the law of parasomnia applies. Hold on, let me see what. Joe hasn't read her book and is intimidated. Well, I also think Joe Rogan has inadvertently been compromised. I think Joe Rogan has, and I think he's beginning to realize it, that his podcast and certain people that he has elevated were intelligence assets. And I don't think he realized that. I think he was a bit naive about that. I'm not going to say he knew. Maybe he knew. But it seems like he didn't know. And from the clips I've seen of people discussing, like, the way Joe Rogan has been behaving recently, it gives off the impression that he's beginning to realize that he's kind of been played by the U.S. government, by having so many of these government officials. And even that he had that ex-CIA guy who has that TV show on the Discovery Channel. He would constantly have that guy on. And after a while, when I would see that guy on and I would hear him talk about things in a manner that I knew were not true, I'm like, oh, this guy's a propagandist. I'm like, well, he says he's ex-CIA, and if, like, you never retire from the CIA. You just get reassigned. So I'm like, okay, this guy is kind of like Joe Rogan's like handler. The more I started watching certain things and the way it just seems like he got played, maybe willingly or unwillingly, and he's now kind of realizing that. But that's just my impression from it. Yeah, I think they do these I think the intelligence agencies make these kind of internships happen. They find certain people, and then they put them in certain situations or in positions that allow them to gain power and experience, and then they can exploit them and use them for their own personal gains. No, we none of us can see everything coming. Especially when we are living in a hyper fixated world, and we are living in a world where every single day people in power are literally trying to change our perception of reality, and they will use some of the most powerful people in the world to change our perception of reality, some of them knowingly and some of them unbeknowingly.
Including a head of a call girl ring active in Europe during the time that she said she was part of it, a sexual blackmail operation for its business, right? And, ultimately, if you're someone like Jeffrey Epstein operating in that, and you see that Adnan Khashoggi can do that, and it's business for him, and you have no moral scruples, why wouldn't you? Especially if you're operating, with intelligence services which benefit you some sort of state protection. John Kiriakou, who's a former CIA analyst, has talked about how, in the CIA in particular, you want to cultivate a source because you need their intelligence, you need their information. It's essentially agency policy to give them anything they ask for in order to secure access to that information and that intelligence, even if it's kids.
It's fucking wild.
And it's even beyond just the agency. So BCCI, this bank, right? The U.S. Senate report on it basically says, not basically, it absolutely says that they also engaged in sex trafficking of minors to elite members of the bank.
So intelligence agencies are trafficking children.
Well, what's intelligence? It's information.
Sure.
Yeah, so any sort of access to information that you can use to your benefit, they want to secure that to get an edge over their competing intelligence agencies. And they will justify anything in the name of securing that intelligence. That's what Operation Underworld was about. We need intelligence from the mob, so we have to team up with the mob, even though it's bad to team up with organized crime. But then they become organized crime, right?
But it's all organized crime.
That's what I'm saying.
It's all organized.
From that point, it became organized crime. Well, even before Operation...
Like, how wild of a concept is that? That they will willingly engage, like government agencies, our own government will willingly engage in trafficking of children to experience horrendous types of abuse in the guise of obtaining intelligence and strategic value towards gaining more leverage, resources. Like, they're willing to sacrifice people just for power, just for intelligence. It's like, it's just a sick and twisted world. And one thing that really just frustrates me about this, and we'll be wrapping up our first part of this series of listen through reactions soon. But one thing that I will never get over is the fact that we all as American citizens, we all have blood on our hands due to our taxes. None of our taxes go to building the roads, right? The United States has some of the worst roads, and we have some of the worst just construction. We don't do anything. All right, none of our money goes to rebuilding, to renovating the schools. None of our money goes to Medicare, none of it. All of our money goes to death, destruction, and despair. And we all have blood on our hands from it. And it's like the most disgusting thing to realize with every day when they take taxes out of our paychecks, that shit is going to some horrible things. It's crazy to think about.
Underworld, this same national crime syndicate, like in New York, had taken over the Democratic Party because they took over the unions. And so, after, and they threatened a few people's lives, but to keep people here and there. And then they controlled New York's Democratic Party and then expand and basically take it over in, other metropolises in the US, and bam, it's done. And then they do the same thing with the Republicans.
So organized crime hasn't gone away. It's just
rebranded.
And the shape
it's rebranded.
Changed.
They're philanthropists now. Well, like, look at Leslie Wexner.
Yeah, of course.
Leslie Wexner's a great example of that.
He's a weird guy.
That's one way to put it. Yeah. So, in the interest of just
exactly, Sarah, we are complicit even when we disagree. Ain't that some shit?
Keeping this on the organized crime thing, Leslie Wexner, his tax attorney got shot in the face in broad daylight a few days before he was supposed to testify to the IRS. And Columbus, Ohio police obviously investigated this murder and produced this document that talks extensively about Leslie Wexner and his ties to organized crime interests. And that was destroyed by the police, supposedly destroyed by the Columbus chief of police. But this local journalist and attorney named Bob Fitrakis obtained it accidentally through a Freedom of Information Act request. And then when confronted with it, that police chief was like, "Oh, I thought I destroyed it. How'd you get it?" Openly admitted to try and cover it up. But I mean, Wexner, for his estates, hires people from Columbus PD, or at least did during that time, to be his private security at his developments like New Albany and places like that. So, and he's the most powerful man in Ohio, the richest man in Ohio by far. So, I mean, you want to be somebody in Ohio politics, you have to go through Wexner. I mean, even J.D. Vance had a fundraiser at his house.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was in the beginning of his career, before the team up with Peter Thiel.
Mm-hmm. You're not a fan of Peter Thiel, are you?
No, I'm not. One of the few in independent media that does not like him. We can get into that later.
Can we get into that now?
All right. And that concludes part 1. We'll come back again for part 2. Check out another 30 minutes of this. There is a lot in there that we can talk about. What is Sarah saying? My bro-in-law says we are all children of the empire, with all the implications of that. Man, that sounds like something straight out of Star Wars. Damn, that's heavy. But very, very true. I would 100% agree with your brother-in-law on that. Yeah, we're going to keep covering this. Like I said, I just want to do this in short little bits because there is a lot to digest in the information. And I'm really enjoying just watching this and sharing with my thoughts and feelings and hearing everyone else's speculations and thoughts and feelings. It's been great. I appreciate everyone taking their time out of their day to hang out with me. Pretty soon we'll be heading over to Hotep Jesus Live. For those who are unaware of, you should check out Hotep Jesus Live on Kick or on X. I do a segment at the beginning of the show on there. If you're unfamiliar, the word of the day. You've probably seen little bits and pieces here on the channel of it. But all in all, Whitney Webb does some incredible work. I'm really enjoying just breaking this down. I'm looking forward to, there's a particular part that I'm looking forward to getting into where she talks about the music industry. I think that's going to be very, very interesting and fun to talk about. Shout out to, let me get over here. Give a shout out to Sarah, Haram Life, everyone, especially Sarah. Thank you for taking time to come in. I think Tim Dillon, he loves Peter Thiel, the comedian. He thinks Peter Thiel's a hilarious individual. But shout out to everyone that's come by. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, please make sure to hit that like button. I should be back with another stream maybe tonight. If not, definitely tomorrow around the exact same time at 12:30. Thank you all for stopping on by. I'll see you, well, some of you at Hotep Jesus Live. And until next time, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, ring that notification bell. Stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love.